Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the Festive Payroll webinar, and this is part one. We do have a part two as well. My name's Alice. I'm going to be your host and presenter for today, and I'm also joined by my colleague Duncan, so we'll both be kind of presenting different sections of the webinar. Let's also take a look at what we'll be covering today. So I'll be starting us off with a section on taking on seasonal staff, so managing payroll for temporary holiday employees. I'll then pass over to Duncan for the next few sections. So we'll be talking about a couple of different scenarios with paying employees, such as paying them early, so managing early payroll runs over the festive season, as well as advance pay as well, so some kind of best practices for handling this. And then I'll come back to process extra payments too. So this is probably going to be like processing bonus payments. We've got like normal pay elements and also net payments too to look at. And then lastly, a little bit of fun to end the session as well. We do have a short quiz, so definitely stay tuned for that towards the end. But let's move on to that first section then. So this first section is going to be all about taking on seasonal staff. So this time of year, it is very common to have seasonal employees. You might have hired extra people over the festive period for a few months just to give you a bit of a helping hand while things are busier. And whilst most things that you'll do in payroll will be, exactly the same as normal, we did want to dedicate a section to seasonal workers to kind of talk about some scenarios and a few things to consider as well. So Sage 50 Payroll does make it easy to deal with seasonal workers, and there are three main things to consider with this. So first thing is going to be new starters. So this is actually adding the employee to your payroll. Now, normally you would do this the same as you would with any other employees. So it could be via the employee wizard, where you would work through inputting the starters information kind of step by step to create the employee record. Or the other option you've got is the quick employee option. So this is like a one-page with information on that you would input to create the employee record there. So again, just depends on which way that you would prefer. We do actually have a recent webinar as well called New Starters, which will go through both of these options in a lot more detail than we will be able to today. So there is a recording available for that one if you'd like to watch that. But I will be showing you where these options are once we go to the demonstration. So that's the first thing to consider. Next thing is actually going to be automatic enrolment. So this is to do with your pensions, particularly postponing your seasonal workers. Because if the employees are eligible to be automatically enrolled, meaning they're of age, they're earning enough and they're a UK worker, they'd normally be automatically enrolled into your workplace pension scheme. But your seasonal workers, when they do first become eligible, you can actually postpone their automatic enrolment by up to 3 months, since they will likely be working with you short term. And that way as well, it depends on whether or not you use the pensions module too. So if you do use the pensions module with this, what we'd advise is leaving the pension scheme blank when you add the new starter. So don't add a pension scheme for them. And then once you actually run the pension assessment for them, you can postpone them in there. But another scenario, if you don't use the pensions module, you can actually postpone an employee in the employee's record. So that'll be in the pensions tab. You will have a postponement expiry date field, and you can enter the last date of the postponement period there. But in both cases, after the postponement ends and that date comes around, if the employee remains eligible for automatic enrolment and they're also still working for you, they would at that point then need to be enrolled into your pension scheme. So that's the second thing to consider there with seasonal workers. And last thing to consider is going to be processing them as leavers. So when their employment is over, you would need to process and update their final payment as normal, process the employee as a leaver, produce the P45, and of course send the FPS to inform HMRC too. And I will be going into a demo shortly, but remember you can download the handouts to be able to access all of these support guides that I've linked on this slide to find out a little bit more about each of these things. So that is kind of the more common way to deal with seasonal workers. So we'd add them as a starter, postpone their automatic enrolment, process them as normal, and then when their employment is over, make them a leaver. But there is another way that you could process seasonal workers. Some of you might already be familiar with it, but this is actually using the on hold status in the employee record. So this option would be suitable for irregular workers, so people who might not be paid every period, or for employees who work with you, for example, every summer or every Christmas, kind of over the busier periods. And what you'd be able to do is set the employee status to on hold for the periods that they aren't getting paid until they resume working with you. And what this would mean is that you don't have to keep setting up a new record every time that they resume work, and you also wouldn't need to make them a leaver each time too, so it would save you quite a bit of time there. But let's go ahead and dive into our first demo of the webinar. I'll just turn my camera off, and I just want to show you a couple of the things that I've mentioned there. So I'm in payroll, and first thing that we wanted to consider for seasonal workers was new starters. So I just want to remind you where these options are. So you are going to be able to find both of these in the employee section. And you'll see we've got the employee wizard. And this is the option where you can record the details of the new starter using the starter form and kind of work through the wizard page by page to set up the employee record. And any kind of compulsory fields that the record does require is just marked with an asterisk there. You've also got the quick employee option just below the employee wizard. And this brings up this one page, so it's just a different kind of format of inputting the information. And again, all of the compulsory fields are marked with an asterisk. And once you fill that in, you click save, and that is the record created. So totally preference which of those you use. Now I've actually already added my new starter ahead of the webinar today. This is Nicholas Saint, who is a seasonal worker. They're actually only going to be with me until January. So second thing to bear in mind for this employee would be postponement. Now, since I am a pensions module user, I've actually left the pension scheme blank in the record. So when I set up Nicholas, I didn't give him a pension scheme, because what I'll actually do is run the pension assessment that will assess Nicholas, and if he's eligible, I would be able to postpone him in there. But just a reminder, if you don't use the pensions module, remember you can postpone them in the pensions tab in the employee record. And then the third thing to bear in mind with seasonal staff was making them a leaver. So you would just do this in the normal way. You would just highlight the employee and go to the leaver wizard. So you could go to wizards and leaver. You could also go to the employee section, and you'll see you've got the option for leaver there too. Both options bring up the same thing, but this is going to bring you to the leaver wizard, which you can work through, enter the leave date for the employee, produce the P45 for them as well. And then, of course, after this, you'd send the FPS to inform HMRC that they've left their employment. So in terms of adding and processing seasonal employees, just a case of remembering those three things to consider. And then, of course, just process their pay as normal while they're working with you. But another scenario, if we look at my employee list, I've actually got an employee on hold too. So Frank is actually an irregular worker. They work through our busy periods, like the summer holidays and over the Christmas season too. And as you can see, they have been on hold for a few months, but they are due payment again this period. So since they're coming back to work, what I'm actually going to do is go into Frank's record. I'm going to go to the employment tab, and we can see currently they're set to on hold. But since he's going to be getting paid again, I'm going to set the status back to OK and click save. And now it would just be a case of including Frank in the pay run as normal. So just taking him off hold to be able to process pay for him. And that's another scenario for irregular workers. So if you do have people who don't receive pay every period, but you don't want to keep adding them as new starters and making them a leaver, putting them on hold will likely be the process that you'll need to follow. But for now, we will pop back to the slides and have a little bit of a recap there. So when an irregular employee is due payment for the seasonal work, what you would do is change their status from on hold to OK in the employee record, process their pay as normal, including sending the FPS. And the FPS will inform HMRC that they're no longer on hold and have received payments. Now, a couple of other things to bear in mind with irregular employees as well. So if you do have anyone on hold who's now left your company, you do need to process them as a leaver, but there are a few different scenarios depending on whether they've been paid in the tax year or not, and also whether they're due a final payment. I do want to just show you this guide that I've linked on the handout as well. I won't be able to demo each of the scenarios, but this will explain kind of what to do in each of these. So let me just turn my camera off. This article is just called Employees on Hold Who've Now Left. And if you scroll down, we can see we've got the 3 scenarios here. So if the employee is due a final payment, if they're not due a final payment, or if they're not due a final payment and actually haven't been paid at all in the tax year. So you'll be able to find everything you need on how to process them as a leaver, depending on the situation. But that was a little bit about seasonal workers, always a popular topic at this time of year. But yeah, fairly straightforward process to follow, as long as you remember those 3 things to consider. And it is now time to pass over to Duncan, who's going to be taking you through the next few sections of the webinar. So it's over to you, Duncan.
Thank you so much, Alice. So we've seen just there some information on taking on new employees. I'm going to move on to your festive pay run, and we're going to give you some tips on a couple of scenarios that are pretty common this time of year. So the first one I want to cover is paying employees early. Now, when we're talking about paying employees early, this is usually because pay date lands around Christmas time, quite often for a monthly payroll. Your pay date would be towards the end of the month, and some employers might choose to pay their employees earlier than normal in the month of December. Now, if you do pay early over that Christmas period, it is really important that you report your normal or contractual pay date on your full payment submission. And this is guidance that's been put out by HMRC for several years now. There is what's known as a permanent easement of reporting RTI in this scenario, in that you don't report the date the employees receive their pay. If it's earlier than normal, you still report their regular pay date. To give you an example on this, if you choose to pay your employees on the 20th of December, but your normal pay date was the 25th of December, which of course is Christmas Day, you would still process it with a pay date or process date of the 25th of December. And then when you've updated records and submit your FPS, that date is reported in your FPS. So you might be wondering why it's so important that you do this, and it's all to do with income-based benefits such as universal credit. So if you have any employees that claim universal credit, they will be assessed each month from an assessment date based on the earnings that they've had in that monthly period. And with mistimed payments, such as an early payment at Christmas, what can happen is that during an assessment period, an employee might have 2 sets of monthly wages, and that could result in their benefit payment being stopped because their earnings have gone too high, when in fact that second payment should probably have landed in the next assessment period. So because a lot of this is automated at HMRC's end, they do now ask you to continue to report your regular or contractual payday, even if you're paying early due to non-banking days, or in this case, due to Christmas. So you can read more about this in a recent employer bulletin from HMRC, which you can read on the gov.uk website. And just to bring this to life a little bit more, I'll give you a quick demo on dealing with that scenario that I've just mentioned. So if I just bring the slides down, I do have a monthly payroll, and as you can see, they were last updated on the 25th of November, as the 25th of the month is my employee's regular pay date. If you take a look at the history of the employees, you can see that I always pay them on the 25th of the month. Now, over Christmas, we have decided they're going to be paid on the 20th. Can't pay them on Christmas Day because it's not a banking day anyway. But we still need to report this as the 25th. So when I come to run my monthly payroll, all I need to remember is that I set the process date to the regular pay date, in my case the 25th of December, and it'll be that date that appears on reports such as pay slips, etc. So just have a quick look at the pay slips. That's going to show my 25th of December pay date, but of course the employees will receive that money earlier this month. And then once I've completed payroll and I've updated the records, when we do our full payment submission, this step just here, it will report the last updated date, so the regular or contractual pay date, as the date in the FPS. And then if we do have employees who are on universal credit, they are not going to be adversely affected. So that's just a little bit of guidance there on paying employees early. The advice from HMRC, as it has been for several years now, is to stick to your regular pay date in this scenario. So on a similar theme to paying employees early, what I also want to cover is advancing pay. So advance pay is a feature in Sage 50 Payroll which allows you to pay an employee early or in advance for a future pay period. So it's not the same as having an earlier pay date. It's actually paying an employee more than one period's wage at the same time. So an example of this one is that your company is closing for 1 week over Christmas, and you want to pay your weekly paid staff for 2 weeks, the week before Christmas, instead of just that usual one. Now, if you use advance pay to do this, the way that it's handled is for tax and national insurance, the thresholds for tax and national insurance will use the number of periods that you've advanced as well as the current period. So you'll get 2 lots of free pay allowance for the tax calculation and 2 lots of the national insurance thresholds when calculating the tax and national insurance for the advance pay. And depending on how you've set up your pay elements, you can advance any type of payment and deduction, attachment of earnings, pension contributions, and loans. And your student loan deductions will also be automatically advanced. Now, it's worth mentioning now that this option isn't suitable for everyone, and there are some specific scenarios where you should not use advance pay. So you shouldn't advance pay for employees receiving statutory payments, because a statutory payment will only calculate up to the process date in Sage 50 Payroll and therefore would not be paid in that advanced period. So in these scenarios, you would do separate pay runs, and if you still want to give your employee the pay early, so 2 weeks instead of 1, you would add together the net pay on the 2 pay slips. The other reasons you should not advance pay is where you have a pension provider who requires a contribution file for every individual period. So they can't accept a contribution file that covers more than one. If you process a salary sacrifice pension scheme, the calculation doesn't quite work with advance pay correctly. And another one to be aware of is if you do have employees receiving those income-based benefits, such as universal credit, advance in pay can have an impact on how their wages are assessed for the benefit payment. So it might be simpler just to stick to doing separate pay runs. So if you choose not to do advance pay, you can process separate pay runs in the same way as usual. So you would run through all of your payroll tasks, set the process date, entering the payments, update records, and submitting the FPS. And then you would move your process date forward a week, and you would do the exact same thing again. You'd end up with multiple sets of reports, and you could at that point choose to pay the total amount on the earlier pay date, if that's what works for you. Now, with that said, I do want to show you how advance pay works in the program. So let's just bring those slides down. And for this demo, I am going to switch to my weekly paid employees. So I'm going to start with just one employee to show you how to advance pay for an individual. So I'm going to start by setting my process date to the date that they're going to receive, in this case, 2 weeks pay. So they're going to get that on the 20th of December. I'm going to go into the enter payment screen. And what we can see currently is their usual basic pay I do 40 hours a week, and this is their hourly rate. And to advance pay for 1 week, I can click the advance pay button at the bottom of this screen. You would enter the number of periods to advance. So how many additional weeks are we paying for? In this case, it is just 1 additional week. And then in this section at the bottom, you would enter the payment, deduction, attachment, and loan details for the pay elements that you want to advance. Now notice that all of these values are cleared down. So I need to know at this point that I want to pay them for 40 hours at their basic rate. So I'm just going to type in like so. Not advancing any deductions, attachments, or loans for this employee. So this is the total advance pay. If I then click OK, you can see that it shows the advanced pay in this summary at the bottom. And looking at the actual summary tab, you can see it shows the current payments and the advanced payments. And it means that for tax and national insurance, it's been able to use the thresholds and allowances for both weeks. Done the same for the pension contribution, and the employee is essentially ending up with double net pay. So their total net pay has been worked out like so. And if we paid that in a lump sum, if we just put through 80 hours in one period, they'd be paying more tax, potentially more national insurance, wouldn't quite work out the same. So that's how it can be set up for an individual employee. But I want to show you a quick tip. If you have multiple employees that are going to receive advance pay and you want some values to automatically advance, so maybe their default values or their current pay values, you can use global changes to set up advance pay. So first of all, I'm just going to show you my pay element settings. So if I go to my company tasks and then pay elements, I've got a basic payment that I do want to automatically advance. So if I edit this payment, you can see there's a tick box at the bottom to auto advance, and that comes into play when you set this up with global changes. So this payment type will be automatically advanced. The other ones, commission and overtime, I have not ticked that box. So what I can do is I can select the employees that I want to advance pay for, but there is one employee that I'm not going to do this for, Jacqueline, because she is currently receiving statutory maternity pay. So I'm going to do separate pay runs for Jacqueline. And then to set up the advance pay, I can go to tasks, global changes, advance pay, and advance pay for a number of periods. I'm going to enter 1 week to advance, and I'm going to base it on the default hours and rates stored in the employee record. You can choose current as an alternative. And if I click OK and yes to proceed, that has set up the 5 selected employees to receive advance pay. And when I go into enter payments, I do have an employee that I've just taken off hold. So that's why I'm getting this warning. You can see that the advance pay is already there. So it was there for the first employee, but we've got a period advanced, and it's picked out the standard amounts, kind of the default values, when working out which payments to pay in advance. Now I'm going to update these employees. Actually, before I do that, I'll show you the pay slips, because the way that advance pay is shown on payslip is different to current payments. So looking on the payslip, we have a line showing any of the current payments, just basic in this case. I also have a separate line given the total advance pay. And when it comes to the deductions, these are the deductions in total for both of these amounts, and this is the total net pay. So anything that's been paid in advance just shows a single figure on a separate line. So I will go ahead and update the records for this one. And you can see the last updated date, instead of showing the 20th, is now showing the 27th of December, because that's the last pay date in the period I advanced. And when I send my full payment submission for this group of employees, it's going to include information which tells HMRC that pay has been advanced. And once the submission has been made, my last FPS date also shows the date that I advanced pay up to. So current status is showing holiday for those employees. Now I have left Jacqueline out. Reason for that is she's receiving a statutory payment. So that is being calculated automatically. Statutory maternity pay, and if I try and advance it, if I put one period to advance, I have got nowhere where I can enter statutory payments, and it doesn't automatically advance that amount. So it's not suitable for this employee. Just going to set the advance periods back to 0. And what I would do for Jacqueline is I would do separate pay runs. So I'd do a pay slip for the 20th, I'd update the records and send the FPS, and then I would run another pay run dated the 27th of December, and that will pay the second week of SMP that is due. So that's your demo on advance pay. Just to reiterate, the scenarios when you shouldn't advance is statutory payments, a pension provider requiring individual contribution files, salary sacrifice pensions, or consider if you've got employees that might be receiving universal credit. You can read more about advance pay following the link on the slide. So that's it from my section. I'm now going to pass over to Alice, who's going to finish this one with Christmas bonuses. So over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, so another very common scenario around Christmas time is bonuses. Let me just double check my screen is shared. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, I mean, not everyone does get a bonus. It does, like, giving a bonus to the employees. It does depend on your company. That is down to you. But yeah, we will talk about how to create and assign the bonus to your employees in this section. So first of all, you need to set up the pay element. So this should be processed as a separate pay element in payroll, mainly because it could be subject to different things compared to your normal like salary or wages and pay elements that you might use, but also just to make sure it shows separately on the pay slip for your employees as well, and just keeps things, you know, nice and clear. So the pay element is usually subject to tax and national insurance and included in qualifying earnings, but it also might be pensionable. So these are definitely things to check with your pension provider. It could be different from company to company, and you do, you know, ultimately want to make sure that you're going to be processing it correctly. But to set up the bonus pay element, you will do this in your company tasks and then pay elements. And then once you've created it, you would then go ahead and assign it to your employees and, you know, process the payments. And a couple of different ways to do this as well, which I will show you now in a demonstration. So we'll go back to payroll. And first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create that bonus pay element. So I'm going to go ahead to company and pay elements. You'll see I do already have a couple of them set up in here. So this is my payments tab. I've already got a bonus, a basic, an overtime and a commission. But I'm going to go ahead and click new. And this is where I can configure that new pay element and tell payroll what it's going to be subject to as well. So I'm just going to give it a name, just call it bonus, nice and simple. And this is where I'll then configure what it's going to be subject to. So remember to check with your pension provider to see if it is pensionable. And you could also check HMRC guidance too if you're ever unsure. Now, when I've checked my bonus is subject to tax and national insurance, so I've made sure that they're ticked. Same with qualifying earnings. So bonuses normally are included towards qualifying earnings. But I've checked with my pension provider and it's actually not pensionable. So I'm going to untick pension main, untick ABC, additional voluntary contributions, and also just make sure the salary sacrifice one is unticked too. So this means that payroll now knows what to calculate. Now, other than that, a few other tick boxes that you can kind of configure here, but I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And that is the bonus pay element created. So this would just then be the case of assigning this to the employees and processing that. But before we go ahead and assign this bonus pay element, there is a different option that I want to talk about too, which is actually called a net payment. So a net payment is something that you can use to pay a specific net amount to your employees, and payroll almost works backwards to kind of work out how much tax or tax and national insurance would be in order to get to that net amount. So let's say you wanted to pay an employee a bonus of £1,000, a net bonus of £1,000. You would set up a net payment, specify £1,000 in enter payments against this net pay element, and then payroll would work out how much tax or how much tax and national insurance would be needed depending on how you've set up that pay element. Now there is a bit more to the calculation than that, but we do have a guide which goes into a lot more detail on exactly how it is calculated by payroll, and that's just linked at the bottom of this slide. But let's go back to the demo and we will set up that net pay element as well, and then get those both assigned to the employees. So I'm still in company pay elements. This is where you will set up that net 1, 2. But instead of being in the payments tab, I'm actually going to be in the net payments tab. And then same again, just click new. I am going to call this one a bonus 2, but just to make it a bit different, I'll just call it bonus net. Just makes it nice and clear that this is the net bonus. And again, I'm going to specify what it's going to be subject to or adjusted for. So in this case, you can select whether it's going to be adjusted for the employee's tax or tax and national insurance. But of course, do check with HMRC's guidance if you're unsure. So I've selected tax and national insurance, and this will add to the gross pay and appear in enter payments and on the employee's payslip as a cost of net payment too. But from here, select any other tick boxes depending on what it's subject to. Again, I'm going to untick those pension tick boxes, but it is included towards qualifying earnings, so I will leave that ticked. Notice as well it does grey out the tax and national insurance, since that is what we specified here. Just to show you as well, if it was just tax, it would just be greying out tax. But I'm just going to click OK now, and that is the net bonus created as well. We can see that new pay element there. And I've now got 2 bonus pay elements ready to assign to my employees as relevant. Now, I did mention earlier there were a few ways to assign the pay element. You can either do this individually by going into the employee record or in enter payments, or to multiple employees at once. So let's go ahead and add the net payment to Merry Christmas. I would like her to receive a specific amount for her bonus. So I could do it in the record, but I'm going to go ahead to payroll and enter payments, and I can actually add it in here. So I'm going to click add payment, and just in the drop down, select that net bonus. Click save, and I can now specify an amount here too. So I would like Mary to receive a net amount of £1,000, so that's what I'm specifying there. And notice when I click tab on my keyboard, we can see that adds to the net pay there. Little piece of advice as well, I did mention this when we were setting it up, but do try to make sure that you do name it appropriately if it is a net payment. You can differentiate it with these tax and NI columns, so it does say net in there, but always helpful just to name it appropriately as well, just in case you do end up having 2 pay elements with the same name. But as I've said, I've just specified £1,000 net bonus for Mary. And you will see this cost of net payments appear too. So we've got the tax showing as what payroll's calculated, and the NI as well, and then a total of both of them. So payroll looks at this figure that we've specified, £1,000, and says, well, if Mary needs £1,000 net for this pay element, how much tax and national insurance would need to be paid to result in that figure? And that's all you would need to do. You would then just process this pay element as normal. And remember, this will show separately on the employee's payslip too. So that was adding the pay element to an individual. But let's also look at adding my other regular bonus to the rest of my employees. And for this, I'm going to use global changes. Now, just bear in mind with global changes, if I didn't highlight anybody, and I went ahead to the global change, it will make changes to everybody in your list. So instead, what I'm going to do is swap my selection so that everyone else can receive that regular bonus, since Mary already has one, and then go ahead and apply that now. So I'm going to go to tasks for this, global changes, payments, and then add payment. I can then choose that regular bonus pay element, click OK, and we'll then get confirmation that we've got 10 employees in the selection and a confirmation of that change made there. So now if I go into enter payments for all of my employees, we'll be able to see we've now got that bonus pay element ready to add figures into and process. So I'll just add the bonus for a couple of my employees here and click close. So I do just want to show you what it's going to look like on the pay slips too before we move on. So if I just go to pre-update reports, we'll pretend I've entered all of the payments for everybody. And I do actually have just a standard laser payslip favorited here, but I can also find that in the laser section. And if we preview this and just make it a little bit bigger, we can see Mary's got that net bonus there of £1,000. And we can see a couple of my other employees as well. We can see that bonus separately on the payslip there, so it's nice and clear for yourself and for the employee too. But that is how to create and add bonuses to your employees. So I just want to have a bit of a recap there before we move on to the final section, which is of course going to be the quiz. So remember, to set up a pay element, you're going to go to the company pay elements, and it's either going to be in the payments tab for a regular payment, or you've also got the net payments tab for things like the scenario that I've just showed you with the net bonus. For net payments as well, once you have assigned it and specified that net amount, a cost of net breakdown will show in enter payments, showing how much tax or how much tax and national insurance payroll is calculated for it. It'll then be a case of assigning the pay element, and remember, you can do this individually. You can either do it in the employee record or you can do it in enter payments just by clicking add payment. But then to add it to multiple employees at the same time and save yourself a bit of time as well, you can use global changes. So either leave everybody unhighlighted to make changes to everybody, or highlight the relevant employees, then go to tasks, global changes, payments, and add payment. And then you'll be able to specify the pay element that you would like to add and to kind of confirm the changes. And then after this, it would just be a case of processing your payroll as normal. But that does bring us to a close for the content that we're covering in our Festive Payroll webinar part 1. Don't forget that you can sign up for part 2 as well, where we will be talking about enhancing your payroll, so things like adding payslip comments, organising your employee list, etc. But for now, it is time to move on to the last short section of the webinar, which is going to be our quiz. So the quiz will work, and we're going to be launching some polls on your screen. You'll have about a minute or so to answer each question, and it'll just be a case of selecting your answer and clicking submit, and we will reveal the correct answer after we've asked each question. So let me launch that first question for you. It is optional, but it would be lovely for everyone to take part and kind of test your knowledge as well. So first question is coming up now. And question 1 is, how long can you postpone automatic enrolment for a seasonal worker? So how long can you postpone automatic enrolment for a seasonal worker? Is it up to 3 months, up to 6 weeks, or until the end of their contract? So remember just to select your answer and click submit. And I'll leave that open for another 30 seconds or so. So this was from the first section of the webinar. So how long can you postpone automatic enrolment for a seasonal worker? Great, looks like most people have got that right, so I will go ahead and close that now and share those results with you. So question one, 92% of you did get that correct. So it is up to 3 months. So you can postpone an employee up to 3 months from their start date or the day they become eligible as well. So well done to those of you who got that correct.
So I've got question 2. Let's have a look at that one. So question 2 is on your screen now. What process date should I use if I'm paying employees early in December? So is it the actual date the employees receive their pay? Is it the regular or contractual pay date? Is it the last day of the calendar month? Or is it the last day of the tax month? So what process date should I use if I'm paying employees early in December? So we'll wait till we've got a good percentage of the votes in. It's looking good so far. And with 80% in, I'm going to close that down. And here are the results. And I'm happy to see that 94% of you got that question right. You should report the regular or contractual pay date. That is the permanent easement of reporting RTI that HMRC would like you to do. So well done if you got that one right. On to question 3. So question 3, in which of these scenarios should you not advance pay? So is it when you're processing statutory payments? If you're processing salary sacrifice pensions? If it's when your pension provider needs a contribution file for every period? Or is it all of the above? So in which of these scenarios should you not advance pay? So I'll give you another 10 seconds or so on that one. Great, and let's just check the results. So I guess everyone's right in this question, but the correct answer, the one we were looking for, is all of the above. So all 3 of those scenarios are when you should avoid using advance pay and you should process separate pay periods instead. So well done to 84% who got that question right.
Thank you, Duncan. And yes, last question of the quiz today. Let me just launch that for you now. Question 4 is going to be, how can you add a pay element to multiple employees at once? How can you add a pay element to multiple employees at once? Is it in enter payments? Is it in the employee record? Or is it using global changes? Great, I can see those answers coming in now. Leave that open a bit longer. So how would you go ahead and add a pay element to multiple employees at once? Great, it looks like most of you have voted there, so I will close that and share those results. And happy to see that 98% of you did get that right. So it is using global changes. You can add a pay element individually in enter payments or in the employee record. But if you've got one that you need to add to multiple people, you may as well use global changes and save yourself a bit of time as well. So well done to those of you who got that right, and for the rest of the questions as well. And yeah, thank you for participating in that as well. But yeah, we can still see a few questions in the Q&A at the moment. So what we're going to do is just pop on hold for a few moments, see if we can answer a couple of them, and then we'll come back, kind of share some further support and end the webinar as well. So we'll go on mute for a few minutes and we will pop back. Hi everyone, that's just me back again. Duncan's taken care of those last questions, so I am going to take this opportunity to go through some further support with you as well before we end the webinar today. So we do run webinars throughout the year for Sage 50 Payroll, and we've got a couple more upcoming before the end of the year. So we do have another session of part 1, if you do want to kind of come back and watch that again. But we do also have Festive Payroll Part 2 on the 10th and 18th of December. So these are going to be going through different kind of things with organising your payroll, so organising your employee list, things like adding festive payslip comments as well, and also personalising your payroll. So definitely sign up for that at sage.co.uk/webinars. We also have our next HR advice webinar coming up on the 15th of January, which is going to be about joining the business day one rights, where we will be joined by some very special guests who are experts in HR, so they'll be given real life scenarios and real life advice as well. But of course, we will have lots more coming up in 2025, including some series of webinars to earn your very own digital badge, so stay tuned for those. We of course also have the Sage Help Centre too, so sage.co.uk/help. All of the articles which we've kind of linked on the slides today have been from there. So very helpful if you do want to search any topics in particular and learn a little bit more about things. You can also find our webinar recordings, helpful videos, kind of demonstrations. And if you do need to get in touch as well, you do have the options to contact our technical support and things too. And lastly, Sage University. So this is sageu.com, and here you can set up a free account and you can access free e-learning courses, bite-sized learning as well. So it's a great way to expand your knowledge on Sage 50 Payroll and some other Sage products too, but also to earn certification too. So as another option for you. But yeah, that is some of the further support that we've got available. Definitely check that out. And yeah, I am going to pop on hold again, just double check we've got the rest of those questions answered, and then kind of come back to end the session. So I will be back in a moment.
Hi again, everyone. That's us back for the last time. So thank you so much for joining us at the webinar today. I do hope that you've picked up some tips and you found the content useful. If you wouldn't mind just taking our exit survey as you leave, we'd really appreciate any of the feedback that you give us. Do look out for a follow-up email arriving later today with a link to the recording of today's session. And it would be great if we could see you at part 2 for some more seasonal hints and tips for your festive payroll. But for now, on behalf of myself and Alice, we're going to say goodbye, and we'll catch you on the next webinar. It's goodbye for now.